Still another alter ego of Yahweh was the God of Abraham, El, Bel or Baal Shaddai, the Canaanite fire and sun god. God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name Yahweh I was not known to them." Exodus 6:3. The above passage is a clumsy attempt to disguise the fact that Yahweh, before choosing to reveal his name, had two predecessors, El and Shaddai. The change in name also suggests a change in gender. El Shaddai, the Thunderer, the Powerful, the Unchangeable, Invincible One, is one of the Judaic names of God, with its etymology coming from the influence of the Ugaritic religion upon modern Judaism. The word Shaddai, derived from the Phoenician root shd. Shaddai was one of the many gods in Canaanite religion. El Shaddai is conventionally translated as God Almighty, while a translation of El as God or Saturn, in Ugarit or Canaanite language is straightforward. The literal meaning of Shaddai is the subject of debate. The root word of Shaddad means to overpower, or to destroy. This would also give Shaddai the meaning of destroyer, representing one of the many aspects of God. El Shaddai is also known as God of natural disasters, God of the mountaintops, God of the storm, and the name is used in context with volcano stories. In Canaanite texts the gods are often collectively called the Saddaim, which might be interpreted as the Almighty Ones. However, the interpretation of Shaddai as Almighty has in itself been questioned, some scholars concluding that it might refer to mountains. Tubal, among others, believes it should be translated as breasts, the Hebrew word for a woman's breast being shad. Thus literal translations of El Shaddai may be God of the breasts or the breasted God. El Shaddai also means sustainer or provider, like a mother nursing an infant. Like the Canaanites, the ancient Hebrews were polytheistic but gradually switched from polytheism to monotheism, adopting the belief in a single God, Yahweh. Their ancestors had worshipped other gods than Yahweh. Who were these gods? Biblical scholars have long noted that the God of the Hebrews had several names and epithets. The earliest were Shaddai, the mountain god or the god with breasts, Elon, the lofty god, and El, the mighty father god known as Saturn. Shaddai was the chief god of the Hebrew patriarchs. El Shaddai was an Amorite or Canaanite storm god, an epithet of the Canaanite father god El or an epithet of the Amorite El in his role as divine warrior, identified early by the Hebrew patriarchs with the Canaanite god El. Admittedly, the primitive meaning of Shaddai is obviously breast. The Hebrew word shad, plural shadaim, means breast. Scholars believe that El Shaddai was a relic of an ancient Canaanite goddess who had been transformed into a male god. Other scholars believe Shaddai means mountain god. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me, and said to me, I will make you fertile and numerous. And Shaddai who blesses you, blessings of the breast and womb. Genesis 48:3-4, 49:25. This would make Abraham's God the God of the breasts, or a hermaphroditic deity, a male god who had incorporated female characteristics. This is not uncommon among fertility religions. Dionysus is among the various gods of this sort who had feminine qualities. Nonetheless, El Shaddai is a feminine noun. This is the Hebrew equivalent of Mother Nature. Greek translators suppressed the feminine translation of Shaddai to maintain an image of male strength. Author Bob Madison in his book titled Now and Then states, Enlil's youngest son Ardad, his name was Ishka, and his cult animal was the bull, which meant he of the mountain land. The Sumerian Ish was rendered Shadu in Akkadian, so that El Shadu became the biblical El Shaddai. Scholars speak of Ardad, whom the Hittites called Teshub, as a storm god, always depicted with a lightning thundering, and wind blowing, and thus the god of rains. The morning sun rising above the mountains is depicted on a cylinder seal, inscribed with the Sumerian designation of the sun god as Dim-Me, Ut-Ar, or Satum, that is the sun god or god Shaddai. Satum is the Babylonian pronunciation of the Assyrian Shaddim, or Shaddai, meaning mountains, and is also equivalent to Suti, which is explained as high places, hilltops. There can be little doubt that this old Babylonian title is the origin of the enigmatical Hebrew Shaddai. While Dim-Me means creator, Dim-Me Satum simply translates as creator of the mountains. The Sumerians thought that the sun rose and set behind a twin mountain, the mountain of the east and west, which day by day guarded its rising and setting. Twin mountains solidly links this with Tubal's breasts translation. Understanding that Mother Earth's breasts was a metaphor for twin mountains. El Shaddai was identical with the El, that is El Shaddai of the Semitic Assyrians, the Dim-Me Satum and Ishkur of the ancient Sumerians, the El Shaddai of the Akkadians, and the El Elyon, or highest god of Melchizedek. All the references to Abraham's God are in the form of El, such as El Shaddai, God of the mountain, sometimes also referred to as the Almighty in the heavens, suggesting an astral deity. If it was Moses who gave the Israelites their God Yahweh, this God Yahweh was fused or synchronized with the gods El and Shaddai. The ancient British Saturn, according to the triads, is Sadie, or Sidin Sadie. Saturn or Sadie seems to be the male, as Side is the female impersonation of the god of fruitfulness. Side or Shad is in Hebrew to put forth, to shed abundantly. Hence Anglic shed and seed. Shed, shid, shad, or sid, is productiveness. As such it became very early adopted into false worship, when men began to worship the creature instead of the creator. Everything which sheds or produces, all fertility, is shed, a field is shed, the female bosom is shed. Hence in Ecclesiastes, shed is a beautiful woman. Sledden says, she was adopted into the Syrian mythology. In the Babylonian and Assyrian cultures she seems to have been known as Sit. Accordingly, Side was a legitimate title of Seers, the goddess of Gorn, and we learn from Sanchoniathon that Siton is bread Gorn. Sito was Seers. The Suddim, or gods of nature, were worshipped by the early inhabitants of Canaan. From them the fruitful valley of Suddim was named as early as the time of Abraham. Saturn wielding the sickle or scythe was likewise known as god of the corn and god of the harvest. The Canaanites and Israelites, following their pernicious example, offered their sons and daughters to Siddim, and the aboriginal Mexicans, before the arrival of the Spaniards, offered children in sacrifice at the first appearance of green corn above the earth. And again at the different stages of the corn's progress. Again we see the correlation of child sacrifice, linking El Shaddai with the likes of Baal, Moloch, Kronos, and Saturn. When Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac, the present text, Genesis 22, is a conflation of Yahwist and Elohist material, to use the old classification. It is not priestly. Had a priestly writer written this text, the deity who demanded the sacrifice of the beloved son Isaac would have been El Shaddai. El Shaddai was later demonized in Psalms 106:37, condemned as one of the devils, the Canaanite Sheddim, to whom the Israelites sacrificed their sons and daughters. Psalms 106, in fact, provides a concise chronicle of how the chosen people whored after other gods, that is, were polytheistic. Blavatsky states, El, the sun god of the Syrians, the Egyptians, and the Semites, is declared by Plato to be no other than Set or Seth, and El is the primeval Saturn, Israel. Shiva is an Ethiopian god, the same as the Chaldean Baal, Bel, thus he is also Saturn. Saturn, El, Seth and Kian, or the biblical Kian of Amos, are all one and the same deity. and maybe all regarded in their worst aspect as Typhon the Destroyer. When the religious pantheon assumed a more definite expression, Typhon was separated from his androgyne, the good deity, and fell into degradation as a brutal unintellectual power. Set was worshipped as a god until the time of Ramesses, and after that the name Set became Typhon. Typhon is a later name of Set, later but ancient, as early in fact, as the 4th dynasty, for in the ritual one reads, O Typhon Set, I invoke thee, terrible, invisible, all-powerful god of gods, thou who destroyest and renderest desert. Typhon belongs most decidedly to the same symbolical category as Shiva the Destroyer, and Saturn the dark god. When the Semitic dynasty Hyksos came into power, they favored the Egyptian god Set, whom they fancied identical with their own Sidek, or El Shaddai. Set was primarily and preeminently god of the pillar, and El Shaddai we hold to have been a form of Set on his mountain of the pole. Set was a deity of the northern celestial pole. Throughout Saturn's reign this sun planet remained fixed at the northern celestial pole. To further solidify this connection, El Shaddai is also known as the unchangeable, that is fixed. The Egyptian Set is identical with the Semitic Seth. The word Set in Egyptian, as well as in Hebrew, means pillar, and in a general sense, the erect, elevated, high. As noted by Herodotus, Typhon was traditionally identified with the Egyptian Set, who was also known to the Greeks as Typhon. Typhon derives from the Greek word, typhine, meaning, to make smoke, fume, singe, burn slowly. Typhon is thus the chthonic figuration of volcanic forces, the cause of eruptions. The Greeks also frequently represented him as a storm demon. Typhon Set, the adversary of Horus, was figured under the symbol of a serpent, called Apophis, or the giant. And it cannot be doubted that he was only a later form of the god Seth. Plutarch mentions Apophis, and shows he was the Titan Saturn. Saturn's serpent is shown biting its tail, a proper emblem of the endless circulation of years, ages and periods of time. Saturn's planetary symbol is also the cross of the Tau, entwined with a serpent. Amazingly enough, both symbols are representative of the S and T, the two most dominant letters of Saturn, Sut, Set, Seth, Satum. Furthermore, author A. Brian Lasseter in his book titled Mythology for the Microcosm displays a list of 7 oppositions that are directly connecting Saturn, Set, and El Shaddai as one and the same divinity. This can only mean one thing. In a passage of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Set is called Tet, a fact which, according to Bunsen, intimates that Thoth inherited many of the attributes of Set. They were, however, in reality the same deities. Set, by change of the initial letter, becomes Tet, one of the names of Thoth, or rather the same name, as Set agrees with Seth. We have in this an explanation of the statement that Tet, the Phoenician Teort, was the snake god, Esmon Aesculapius, the serpent being the symbol of Tet, as we have seen it to have been that of Seth also. In this we have a means of identifying the Semitic deity Seth, with the Saturn and related deities of other peoples. The god of time was worshipped under the names of Kion, by the Egyptians, clearly taken from Sion, a name of Saturn, or Seth, and Sion is the same as Gain. El or El was at the head of the Babylonian pantheon. With this deity must be identified the El or Elos, of the Phoenicians, who was the same as Cronus, who again was none other than the primeval Saturn. Saturn and El were thus the same deity, the latter, like the Semitic Seth, being, as is well known, symbolized by the serpent. A direct point of contact between Seth and Saturn is found in the Hebrew idol Kion, mentioned by Amos, the planet Saturn being still called Kaivan by Eastern peoples. This idol was represented in the form of a pillar, the primeval symbol of deity, which was common undoubtedly to all the gods here mentioned. We may take the line of calling every system of polytheism monotheism in disguise, or we must confess that the monotheism of the Israelites was polytheism in disguise. We find that El, Elohim, Yahweh, Elion, Kronos, Saturn, Uranos, El Shaddai, Baal, Bel, are after all one and the same, or else transmutable deities of the God of the Israelites.